The Bloodline saga is starting to get interesting, as we learned on this week's edition of WWE SmackDown, as we had a lot of the parts that are seemingly going to make up this Bloodline War Games match at Survivor Series on this show, as you had, of course, Solo Sikoa's version of the Bloodline, and you also had Roman Reigns and Jimmy Uso there to try to continue to fight off Solo and company. We saw that was not very successful by the end of the show. But you also had Jey Uso, who made an appearance to try to talk some sense into Solo Sikoa to stop dividing the family. That was really one of the main themes, and I think you're going to continue to see that moving forward in terms of the story that they're trying to tell on the road to War Games. But you also had some other things on this particular episode of SmackDown that were notable with storyline developments. But let's begin with the Bloodline, because as usual, that was the theme of the show, as we are now month and a half away from Survivor Series, and we know we have to get to that War Games match. And while there were some potential questions as to whether we were going to get Bloodline versus Bloodline, those have been answered as of now because we're headed that direction. It's just the same question we've been asking for a while. How is everybody going to get back on the same page? And it started off in a very intriguing way here because you did have Jey Uso kind of make the surprise appearance when Solo and company came out to start the show. You have Jey come in, and it's Jey who is the one who's trying to kind of, get out in front of everything, knowing that Jimmy came all the way to Raw this past week to try to convince Jey to get on the same page, to have him join he and Roman Reigns for this War Games match, but Jey was not having any of it, right? So he comes to the show here on SmackDown before Roman and Jimmy arrived, so I think, that was somewhat notable here. And you just kind of have Jey talking to his little brother, as he keeps calling him Solo Sikoa, and trying to tell him to stop doing this, right? Stop having this sort of strife with the family because all it is doing is bringing everyone down. And you can kind of understand Jey's motivations here if you really look at it, because if you're Jey Uso and you're seeing Solo continue to do this, and now you are in a position where you are that close to being dragged back into it, as you guys know, we've talked about that so many times. This is really a lot about Jey not wanting to get back into this thing because he now has the Intercontinental Championship. He does not want to sacrifice everything he's done away from the Bloodline just to go back into it with nothing. And so Jey's trying to stop this because he knows how close he is now. He knows that he is right there going to have to make a really hard decision, right? And so I think that was very notable in terms of how Jey is talking to Solo here. But, really that was Jey's message. He did not want to have this continue. And Solo says this will not continue as long as everyone acknowledges me as the tribal chief. You also had Jey interacting with Jacob Fatu here, which was very important because that could play into what's going to happen on Raw on Monday. We know Jey's getting his Intercontinental Championship rematch against Bron Breakker. How did the Bloodline play into it? Well, we didn't stop there because we know that there was more with Jey here, and it was the eventual conversation that he had to have with Roman Reigns because he already didn't really have a full conversation with Jimmy. They just sort of interacted on Raw. But now you have Jey having that interaction with Roman Reigns. We didn't know if the first one was going to be Reigns going to Raw, or in this scenario now where Jey comes to SmackDown to try to talk to Solo, and all of his crew. And now, as he's leaving, he runs into Roman and Jimmy. What do you know? Bad timing for Jey Uso having to run into Roman Reigns here. But, Roman admits he's proud of Jey, right? And I think that was something where what we're seeing, and if you go through and sort of watch everything since Roman Reigns' return, I think you're still seeing them drop these little tiny things along the way. That Roman Reigns is really struggling with trying to be this new guy, right? He's really struggling with trying to be someone that he, is not and has been for the longest time, right? I mean, he was the tribal chief, and he was doing some bad things. And I think you're really seeing Reigns is sort of struggling. Yes, you have some stuff come out like this where he's proud of Jey and all this other stuff, but I think they're still kind of doing some of those things to make you understand that not even Roman is all the way yet in terms of like turning into this full-blown guy who is just the nicest guy ever and all. That's not Roman Reigns, right? That's not the tribal chief. And so I think having this interaction, he admits he's proud of Jey, but, he grabs Jey by the arm, all this other stuff, and I think, Jey is still not having it. He still wants no part of this, and we know why, right? Because of what he just told Solo in the ring. And he is trying to solve this now. He's trying to get out in front of this before we get to War Games because he wants to see if he can end it. Well, Jey knew it wasn't going to be that easy. He wasn't going to be able to just say, you know what, Solo, you should stop, and Solo was going to stop. That wasn't going to happen. But the interaction with Roman Reigns is important. You kind of see Jimmy, is this sort of quizzical look in the background as Jimmy's trying to figure out what's going to happen here, because Jimmy has tried to take charge to get Jey on this same page with these two guys, but it's just not happening. Roman can't do it either. And then, of course, you get to a point to where Roman's like, you know what, we tried with Jey. It's not going to work. Let me do it my way. So, Roman comes out. He acknowledges Solo, but he's not going to acknowledge him as the tribal chief. That leads to the beatdown. Solo, Jacob Fatu, and the Tongans, they take out Roman Reigns and Jimmy Uso to end the show. And we said, people were a little surprised at the fact that Solo beat Jimmy last week. But I said, I think now you're in a position where if you're going to do this War Games match, like Solo and the Bloodline have to have some positive momentum because they've lost that in recent months. And they have to get some of that back. So having Solo beat Jimmy, now having them sort of standing tall over Reigns and Jimmy, they had to be in this position, because if you don't do that, again, how are we to believe that this group is going to beat a group that is going to probably consist of Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, Jimmy Uso, and Sami Zayn? How are they going to be able to do that if they have no momentum? So I thought actually this was some of the better work from Solo here, because they needed to kind of establish that he still, in this position feels pretty comfortable and is sort of regaining some of that momentum that maybe he had pretty early on, in the Bloodline's run months ago. And so they've needed that the past couple weeks. And so if you go beyond that, right? So they have them standing tall over Reigns and Jimmy to end the show, which once again signifies that Reigns and Jimmy need help. They need more help, and we know what that's going to, play into. But there are a couple interesting things coming out of this. I'm going to tell you guys right now, I'm going to tease it. I'm doing a video tomorrow on Jey Uso saying something to Solo Sikoa that I didn't mention previously, but there was something in there that dropped a pretty interesting message as to what's going to happen with the future of the Bloodline. And I'm going to do a video on that tomorrow, so be sure to subscribe button so you don't miss it. Turn on those notifications. I promise you, it's going to be very interesting when you really sort of dissect something that Jey said. But we also have to, as I mentioned a minute ago, look at this in terms of what's going to happen on Monday. Because Jey is going to challenge Bron Breakker, or Bron Breakker is going to challenge Jey Uso for the Intercontinental Championship, the big rematch. And now you almost know that it is a guarantee that the Bloodline are going to get involved in this match in some way. And I know people are debating two sides of this. Is it going to be where Jacob Fatu, after Jey said he's going to knock his ass out, is Jacob Fatu going to get involved here and cost Jey Uso the Intercontinental Championship? Bron Breakker beats him to retain the title. And then we move on to where Jey is in a position where, you know what, now I got to get back in this thing because they just cost me my Intercontinental Championship. That's one way to do it. Or is it the other way, where the Bloodline are inevitably going to interfere? We know that's going to happen. But is it where Roman and Jimmy also know that that's going to happen? And because they just left Roman and Jimmy lay it out, does that give Roman and Jimmy the incentive to now come stop the Bloodline? And maybe there's someone else there who also can help stop the Bloodline, which, of course, is Sami Zayn. So, and then Jey retains the title in that scenario, right? So there's a couple ways you can go with this. And I think, you can make an argument for both directions here. But I do think it's going to be fascinating because one of these, is going to really escalate this feud in terms of getting us to War Games. Just don't know which one it's going to be. You can say on one hand, well, Jey's run has not been that long, and him losing to Breakker may feel a little bit underwhelming to just swap the title back basically a month after it happened, right? But on the other hand, you can also say that Jey being a long reigning Intercontinental Champion was never really the plan. It was really just about Jey proving that he could do this. And it was never going to be about Jey's not going to hold the Intercontinental Championship for 6 months or anything like that. And so Jey winning alone kind of really added a big part of the story, because he did show that he could achieve something of great importance without the Bloodline. And so you don't really, need him to go out and defend the title 8 times to prove that. You've already proven it. You've gotten that huge moment. And so at some point, Jey not having the championship on him is going to probably benefit WWE more than having the championship on Jey. And that's where if he is involved with the Bloodline through Survivor Series, you're not really doing anything with the Intercontinental Championship at that point. So I think you can make an argument both ways, and I think it's going to be interesting, like I said, which route do they decide to go here, because, you've got to get everybody on the same page still. Jey is, as he should be, still being the one to kind of hold things up a bit, because he shouldn't just say, you know what, sure, I'll come help you guys. But now it's all about what do you kind of do to precipitate Jey to be forced to make this decision that he is going to have to help Roman Reigns and Jimmy Uso against his best, sort of feelings inside. He doesn't want to do this, but he's going to have to do it. What's going to force him to do that? And remember, too, I think we talk about Jey being the one that's in a position where he's got to make the tough decision. The toughest decision, I think, of this whole thing is going to be Sami Zayn, if that is the direction they're going, because Sami is the one who, again, hit Roman Reigns in the back with the chair, right? I mean, again, in one of the more memorable moments we've ever seen in terms of that angle they did at the Royal Rumble, a couple of years ago or whatever. Like, that to me is still the thing that stands out, right? And so that's something you really have to get over here. And how are they going to somehow... Sami hasn't even been mentioned in this thing, but you're going to have him, right? Based on how they're telling the story. And so that, I think, is still another question that's out there. How do you get Sami back into this? And I think that's where Sami getting involved on Monday, to me, sounds like something that makes a lot of sense, just because you want to have him interact somehow with the other members. And if you do that, then I think you start to sort of build that tension between Sami and Roman, Sami and Jimmy, maybe, and you kind of see how Jey and Sami are going to make this thing work to perhaps get back with the other two. So a lot coming out of this. Again, and I thought this was the way they did it here. They set up a lot of things, and it makes Monday's title match must-see, which is exactly what you want, because something big is going to happen. You just don't know how it's going to happen. You don't know which way it's going to happen. And like I said, too, I am going to do the video with Jey saying something I think that was very fascinating and important as they continue to tell this Bloodline story. And it also teased, I think, exactly what is to come with a certain message that Jey Uso sent to Solo Sikoa in that promo on SmackDown. So, again, a lot of stuff here to digest from SmackDown in terms of the Bloodline, and we'll see kind of how it all plays out going into Monday's match for the Intercontinental Championship. Jey Uso defending against Bron Breakker. All right, everything else on SmackDown. Yes, it did sort of feel secondary, I think, to what happened here. One notable thing, they kind of played up the stuff going on with Randy Orton and Kevin Owens. And, Owens was not on the show. If you saw it earlier, he released the video, about kind of explaining, why WWE is keeping him away from SmackDown. And Owens is not really sure when he's going to be able to come back now. They're kind of teasing that as though Owens can't trust WWE. And, it's because they're trying to keep him away after what he did to Cody and all this stuff. So they're being very creative, as we said, using Owens' own personal videos here to try to push the, part of the story. But then you also have Randy Orton, who's requesting a match from Nick Aldis here to have Kevin Owens at Crown Jewel. Aldis telling Orton that he cannot do that because the decision has to be made at a higher level, which means, of course, Orton teases that he's going to have to go talk to Triple H because he wants this match with Owens, and that's kind of where we leave it off here. Because we know Cody has his hands full elsewhere with Gunther. Cody did a promo here setting up another face-to-face with Gunther. I'm just going to be honest with you. I just think the stuff with Cody and Gunther, the match is going to be great, just like I said on Raw, but I just think story-wise, this is something where I think you're having to book to the championship, and you're not, necessarily booking something that is a feud that leads to the championship. It's just you're having to book from the championship first, if that makes sense. And it's just a match that is forced because they are introducing this Crown Jewel title. And so I don't think they necessarily want to get into a lot when it comes to Cody and Gunther yet, because that is still a big program that you can do in the future. And I think for now, you just do it, and you maybe do the bare minimum to get to it, because I just don't, these first two things that they've had basically to lead, or really three things. What's had the face-off the week before where they're staring at each other in the aisle. They didn't really say a whole lot on Raw. Cody here just kind of, proclaiming that he wants to be the first Crown Jewel champion and then inviting Gunther for a face-to-face next week. It's just not a lot of, sort of huge stuff that's going on in terms of storyline with this, but maybe you just sort of come to expect this now because the new championship, it's really going to be contained to this one event each year, and maybe they don't want to necessarily, make this some huge extravaganza in terms of, the story part of it. And so Cody didn't say a whole lot here. All that to say, the bigger focus now is on Orton and Owens for now, knowing that we're eventually going to get Cody back into this after Crown Jewel with these two, but I don't know what's going to happen. Are we going to get Randy Orton versus Kevin Owens? All those things, still to be decided, but I thought it was interesting kind of how they played it up here. And Owens sort of teasing that he doesn't know if he can trust WWE anymore, which we know Owens' contract is coming up too and all those things. And so certainly, kind of maybe playing into that a little bit and adding, blurring some of those lines of reality as well with this. So we'll see what happens when we're going to get that match between Orton and Owens here with all the stuff going on coming out of it. So elsewhere on SmackDown, you had the Motor City Machine Guns make their debut as expected. They get the win and look good. I mean, of course, this is a very experienced tag team, and I think they're a huge asset for this division now, which I think has continued to sort of need a little bit of, kind of fresh faces involved in it now. And so they get the win, and they're going to move on to take on DIY next week with the winner going on to face the Bloodline for the Tag Team Championships. Look, I'd be shocked if Motor City Machine Guns do not win this match next week against DIY. Should be a good match, but I don't think you're building them up the way they have with all those video packages and everything to not have them have an opportunity to compete for the championships. And so I think they're going to win that match next week. And then the question becomes, do they take the titles off the Bloodline? It'd be a hell of a way to debut a team where they come in and they immediately win the championships from the most important faction in the company. So that would certainly be notable if that happens coming out of this. So good debut. These guys are fantastic. Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin, and yeah, I just think that they're a great fit. I think in this tag team division with what it needs right now. So all the other stuff on the show, you did set up LA Knight as the special guest referee for Game 7 next week, Andrade versus Carmelo Hayes. LA Knight's going to be the special guest referee. Aldis announced that. So that adds, I think, something different. I mean, you've done a 7-match series now. You need a little bit something different maybe for this final match. So having LA Knight involved, that at least, I think, garners a little bit more interest coming into that. You did have as well Candice LeRae getting the pin on Bayley in the tag team match. No Tiffany Stratton on the show, but you did have Jax teaming up with LeRae. Yeah, Jax looked a little frustrated that Candice LeRae was actually the one who pinned Bayley coming out of this in the tag team match with Naomi there. So that adds a little interesting development in terms of Candice getting the pin here, and what does that mean for her moving forward as first speed champion and all that. So we know the bigger story is still Nia versus Liv Morgan heading into Crown Jewel, and of course the Tiffany cash-in is always there. But I think that is something that they're kind of teasing too with that. So that was again something that was I think notable coming out of this, because I don't think a lot of people expected Candice LeRae to pin Bayley coming out of this thing. So you had that. Lash Legend gets the win on Piper Niven. I think it's very also noteworthy that Lash Legend and Jakara Jackson are being used in a pretty prominent role here in terms of how they're pushing them now. They had that tag team championship match. What was it, last week? They get some of the spotlight on Raw in the tag team championship match on Monday, and now you have Lash Legend get the one-on-one victory over Piper Niven here, and still teasing something with Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill. So clearly, I think you kind of see how they view Lash Legend and Jakara Jackson, two NXT talents coming up now, and how maybe they're going to use them in the future. So I thought that was also interesting there. Trying to see if there's anything else coming out of this. No, I mean, that was, again, that was really it. It was really about the Bloodline and kind of teasing some of those other stories along the way, but this was a Bloodline-dominated show, and you know what? I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because this is the biggest story in the company. It's the biggest one you're telling, and like I said, I feel like Cody is kind of in a holding pattern with this Gunther match, because it's one you're going to do at Crown Jewel, but it's also going to be just sort of, kind of cornered at Crown Jewel, and that's it. Like, you're not going to really continue that beyond that point for now. So there you go. That was SmackDown. I wonder what you guys thought about everything with the Bloodline here. Roman Reigns, Jimmy Uso, Jey Uso. How's this going to go down? What do you think's going to happen on Monday? Which way? We talked about two potential options they could do for that Intercontinental Championship match on Monday. How do you think it's going to play out? Let me know your thoughts. Always appreciate your feedback, guys. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button on your way out. Like I said, I am going to have a video tomorrow looking at exactly what Jay said in that message to Solo Sikoa, because I think there's something very important there that we have to discuss moving forward in how it's going to play out, not just in the short term with the Bloodline, but also in the long term. So we'll have that tomorrow. So hit that subscribe button. Appreciate you guys watching as always. Let me know your thoughts on this week's edition of WWE SmackDown.